you give me an example just to kind of put it into context of someone who was suicidal, but you decided not to section them?
Yeah. There's a certain group of patients who are notoriously difficult to assess in mental health act assessments. And I have to put a little bit of caveat here. This is in no means trying to minimize the experiences of people with personality disorders. But the truth is, from a psychodynamic perspective, the difficulties they have in their lives can sometimes be projected onto you, and you can find it very anxiety-prone. One of the core features of emotionally unstable personality disorder is suicidality. That means, to put this into context, in the same way that someone with pneumonia might have a cough, someone with a personality disorder feels suicidal. As a result, we've had research that tells us that suicidality in itself cannot be used as a predictor of suicide. And to put that into even more context, 90% of suicidal EUPD patients do not eventually die by suicide. And of the 10% that do die by suicide, one of the statistically significant risk factors, prior hospital admissions. So if you put all that into context and you get someone in a mental health act assessment with emotionally unstable personality disorder that tells you they are suicidal, you want to admit them into hospital. That seems like the right thing to do. But if you look at the research, you are harming them by doing that, because you are robbing them of the distress tolerance that's required to navigate life. So, say for example, you see an EUPD patient who's had a romantic relationship breakdown. That's life. You know? But because they might struggle to deal with those kind of feelings, they might come to your attention and say they're suicidal. If you admit that person into hospital, you protect them from ending their life, you discharge them, and they go back into society where they're at risk of that happening again. People do have breakups. Now, that person has been conditioned to think, if I have a romantic relationship breakdown, I can go into hospital because that's what happened last time. Now, if there's any kind of resistance into them going to hospital, their self-harming behavior escalates. They might have, first of all, started to slash their wrists. Now they've nicked their own radial artery to get that seriousness, to ensure that they go into hospital. So you've created someone who is dependent on mental health services, who has been robbed of their distress tolerance, but you didn't intend to. You wanted to help them.
Generally, overall, the consensus is that admission does not improve benefits or outcomes for patients with EUPD.
Current research actually suggests that admission is harmful. The best case scenario is that they are delivered DBT as an outpatient. All evidence-based treatments are outpatient treatments. But while before we used to think admission is unhelpful, current research suggests it is actually harmful, because there are a lot of reasons, but one of them is the distress tolerance I just talked about, the ability to tolerate life's inevitable challenges.
So there's a difference between research and you being the person who has to make this decision.
Exactly.
The research can say everything, but then if you are in that situation with two anxious health professionals next to you saying that, oh my God, this person says that they want to kill themselves and they're going to go home alone, we should admit. So there is a certain level of anxiety there,
Of course,
where that seems the best decision, so to speak, or the one with the least risk to yourself. What kind of strategies can you use in that situation where you have to balance both the needs of being part of a collaborative team, your own opinion, and the objectivity we can bring to caring for someone with a health condition?
First and foremost, you have to remember that even though as human beings, we naturally are collaborative, but you are an independent. You are working in an independent capacity. So even though your decision might inevitably cause conflict between the other doctor and an AMP, you have to act in that patient's best interest. You cannot, in trying to preserve the relationship between the other doctor and an AMP, not do what's right for the patient. Secondly, your documentation has to be on point, because one of the things you mentioned is the anxiety. The anxiety of knowing that two people wanted to admit this patient. That's probably in that time the safest thing to do for yourself, because you would sleep better at night. Yeah. And also the fact that some EUPD patients do kill themselves, So you have to, in case that person does kill themselves, in case they're among those 10% that do end up dying by suicide, and the coroner asks you, why did you make that decision? You have to document, for example, what I just said. Suicidality is a core and chronic feature, and as such, it cannot be a reliable indicator of suicide. 90% of them do not commit suicide. Of the 10% that do, prior hospital admissions is a risk factor. So by the time you've documented that, coroner's court is a fact-finding exercise. So they can see that, okay, there is a rational reason why this person did not admit this patient. They were actually trying to act in the patient's best interests. So part of it is learning to sit with anxiety. I think that's a life lesson, really. We go through life at different points having heightened levels of anxiety, but you still have to do what you need to do. And part of that is experience. When you find yourself in emotionally heightened situations where you're stressed and you're anxious, just learning to sit with it and go about your life. That comes with experience. But probably the most important bit is having robust documentation, especially when there's a disagreement, because the other doctor might make a medical recommendation that this person is detained. The AMP might support that doctor's decision to admit. So you're standing by yourself in your own corner. Different people, I have to say this, that different people will have different levels of anxiety tolerance.
So what happens if you don't agree?
In the vast majority of cases, everybody will agree. So for example, you both go to, the other doctor and an AMP, go to see a psychotic patient. Then they start responding to voices. Immediately, you look near their plugs, there are papers there, there's a fire risk, their house is cold, they've not eaten in 2 days, they've not slept in 3 days. This person needs to go into hospital. And just to add to that, unlike emotionally unstable personality disorders, quick hospital admission is actually evidence-based in treating psychosis. That's why we have an early intervention service. The quicker you admit them and start treatment in hospital, the better the prognosis of their illness. So you have to act quickly and crucially. In emotionally unstable personality disorder, when I first started working as an independent Section 12 doctor, the moment I hear that anybody is suicidal, I'm pulling out a medical recommendation because I didn't know better. So unsurprisingly, some doctors also don't know better. Someone is suicidal, they don't want to hear anything you have to say about research. I once had a Section 12 doctor ask me if I'm crazy.
Straight up. It's like, are you the one we should be Section?
And it has gotten quite heated because some people struggle with the fact that you don't have to agree. Because we're human beings, we prefer to be agreed. We prefer, and in the vast majority of cases, even though you are having independent opinions, you will agree. This person is very unwell. They need to be detained. So when it happens where you don't agree, that doctor might say, I am making a medical recommendation for detention in hospital, and they make their own medical recommendation. The AMP may agree with that person or they may agree with you. And then you have to make your own documentation for why you do not think they should be admitted. As an independent Section 12 doctor, most times I don't have access to the recording system in the trust. For example, if I go and do an assessment in Liverpool, I cannot document on their record-keeping software or system So I need to email the AMP my own record and say, can you put it on there on my behalf? Or whoever is available. Sometimes it's even the doctor that disagrees with you.
You make them do the documentation and everything, don't you? Yeah. Oh, you're very evil. Well, if two doctors disagree, it is the AMP who makes the final decision.
No. So if two doctors disagree, that patient cannot be detained.
Okay. They're not detained.
They're
So
not-
it has to be a consensus of everyone, all three people present.
Yeah. So
Okay.
to put it into context, the reason why that assessment is happening is to ensure that people are not inappropriately deprived of their liberty. Because when you detain someone, you are depriving them of their liberty. You're saying, I'm going to lock you up in a hospital. Not in so drastic terms, but effectively,
Yeah.
you're putting them in a hospital and you're forcing them to have treatment
Yeah.
in their best interests.
Yeah.
But to make sure that that is actually the best decision to make, all parties need to agree that that is the right thing to do for that patient.
All right, Idris, thank you so much for being on the channel
Yeah.
and for sharing your expertise.
Yes, man. Anytime.